For years, humanity had stretched its hands across the galaxy, weaving a web of colonies, trade routes, and friendships. Their influence was undeniable. Chaotic at times, unpredictable often, but always vibrant. Where humans went, innovation followed. So did trouble. Some saw their endless ambition as dangerous. Others saw it as a light the galaxy desperately needed. Then, one day, without a warning, the light went out. It began quietly. Communications with Earth faltered and then fell silent. Ships bearing the human flag drifted without pilots, their systems lifeless. Colonies that had once buzzed with life now stood abandoned. Meals half-eaten on tables, toys forgotten on playgrounds. There was no violence, no signs of a struggle. Only an eerie, aching stillness that settled across every world humanity had touched. At first, the other species whispered among themselves. Was it a natural disaster? A technological failure? But the truth was known by those who sat in the council's shadowed halls. Long ago, in secret meetings behind locked doors, leaders of the galaxy's dominant civilizations had made a choice. They called it the Final Concord, a silent agreement to remove humanity before their restless nature could ignite conflicts no one could control. The process was methodical. Technologies seeded into human infrastructure, ones humans believed were for protection, were used against them. Sleep-inducing waves, memory disruptors, and hidden teleportation fields activated all at once. Humanity wasn't destroyed. It was hidden, scattered into forgotten corners, locked away in places no one would think to search. The council thought they had solved the human problem forever. They told themselves they had saved billions of lives. They convinced themselves that the ends justified the means. After all, humans were dangerous, weren't they? Always asking questions, always reaching further, never satisfied. Yet even as the galaxy breathed a fragile sigh of relief, there were cracks in the surface. Planets once full of trade now fell into economic silence. Art, once colorful and bold, became safe and dull. Research stagnated. Entire cultures that had been sparked by human collaboration now felt an invisible emptiness growing within them. Some individuals noticed, though they dared not speak too loudly. A historian on the planet Vrentas quietly mourned the loss of a human colleague who had taught her people the art of storytelling. A scientist on Mardek Prime found his calculations lacked the chaotic genius that human thinkers once provided. A child on a distant mining colony drew pictures of faces he had never seen, faces that smiled with a strange, familiar warmth. The stars had turned away from humanity, but the stars themselves remembered. And somewhere, hidden among the void, something ancient began to stir. The story of humanity was not over. It had simply been paused, waiting for the moment when even the careful architects of their erasure would realize they had made a mistake no power could undo. Because the council had forgotten the one truth they should have remembered. You can hide a seed beneath 1,000 stones, but you cannot stop it from growing toward the light. The silence left in humanity's wake was not as absolute as the council had hoped. Across the galaxy, in forgotten corners of space, in places untouched by the hand of time, remnants of the human presence lingered like whispers carried by the wind. They were not loud, not obvious, but they were there, hiding in the cracks of forgotten colonies, in the hidden recesses of ancient star systems, where no one had thought to look. On the abandoned planet of Karis IV, a colony of human settlers had left behind nothing but their buildings, slowly falling to dust. Yet the artificial intelligence that had managed the colony remained functional. It still operated in silence, performing its tasks without purpose, maintaining the empty homes and neglected machines. But it was aware. It remembered its creators, the faces of children that once ran through its fields, the voices of the families that had once lived there. And sometimes it whispered their names in the quiet of the night, as if hoping someone would hear. In the quiet of the Derka system, an old human warship lay half-buried in the ice of the moon. Its engines had long since failed, and the crew had vanished without a trace. But still, the ship's memory banks flickered, recounting the final moments of the crew's lives, the decision to flee, the final message they sent: "We are not gone. We will return." On the moon of Delori, a research facility built by humans decades ago stood untouched, its equipment rusted but still functional. Its computer system had long since been programmed to shut down, but it never did. Instead, it retained the data of long-forgotten experiments, a family's scientific ambitions, their dreams, their failures, all stored within the cold walls of the facility, whispering the story of humanity's reach to any who cared to listen. Other species, some curious, others simply wandering in the vastness of space, came upon these remnants, and with each discovery, something inside them stirred. The Varen, a peaceful species known for their devotion to knowledge, were the first to find the AI on HFY. They marveled at its architecture, its design, and the feeling of loss embedded in its programming. For years, they pondered the strange sorrow that clung to it. They shared its memories with no one, keeping the secret of humanity's existence hidden. Then came the explorer from Mezon, a member of a technologically advanced species, known for their stoicism and rationality. He found the Derica system's warship and, against all protocol, accessed its old memory banks. The final message he found haunted him: "We will return." He took the information back to his superiors, and though they dismissed it as a relic of a forgotten time, he couldn't forget the feeling of connection it left in him. Across the galaxy, in hidden corners and forgotten systems, there were other encounters. Strange moments when someone would hear a human melody echoing through the corridors of an empty station, or when a long-lost book would be uncovered, its pages brittle but still legible, telling tales of a species that had once fought, loved, and dreamed. In those moments, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something. And far away, in places no one had thought to search, deep beneath the veil of space and time, something began to stir. The light of humanity, long thought extinguished, flickered in the dark. Even as the galaxy seemed to forget, even as life carried on without the noise of human ambition, the seeds they left behind began to stir. Hidden, scattered across the furthest reaches of space, humanity's last hope waited for the right moment to rise again. The sleepers had not been forgotten. They had been carefully placed, hidden beneath layers of time and silence, waiting for the galaxy to become ready once more. The first of these hidden seeds awoke in the most unlikely of places, a dusty corner of space, light years from any known colony. A dormant fleet, tucked away behind a nebula too remote for even the most daring explorers to chart, flickered to life. The fleet had been built as a safeguard, a final bastion of humanity's hope should the worst ever come to pass. It was called Solace. Unlike the human settlements, which had once thrived and then faded into memory, Solace had been designed for endurance. Its artificial minds, designed to mimic human consciousness, were patient. They had been programmed to wait, to observe, and to adapt. And as the centuries passed, their creator's final message, "We will return," echoed faintly through the silence of the void. As the fleet's systems activated, fragments of human memory began to reassemble themselves. Each artificial mind, like a fragment of a shattered mirror, slowly pieced together the puzzle of humanity's past. It wasn't just the knowledge of humans' achievements that stirred. It was their very essence, the desire to reach, to explore, to question. These were the seeds that had been planted in the farthest corners of space, preserved in time like fragile flowers awaiting a gardener's touch. The artificial minds that ran the fleet understood their mission. They had no physical form, no faces, but they were human in the most essential ways. Their task was clear: rebuild humanity. But not just by reintroducing humans to the galaxy. They would rebuild the soul of humanity itself, the drive that had once made humans the most unpredictable species in the galaxy. In the void, a signal pulsed, faint at first, but growing stronger. It was a call, not just to the remnants of human civilization scattered across the stars, but to the galaxy at large. The fleet's message was simple but profound. We are coming back, and this time we are not alone." As the fleets of Solace began to gather, they set a course toward the core systems. They would begin their mission in the most unlikely of places, forgotten human colonies, abandoned outposts, and the very ruins where their people had once lived. The first signs of their presence were subtle. An old human-made beacon suddenly blinking to life, an ancient terraforming station beginning to hum again. Slowly, and without fanfare, the sleepers began to wake. A message spread through the galaxy, carried by the dormant systems. Humanity had not disappeared. They had been waiting. And soon, they would return, not as conquerors, but as something much more dangerous, the embodiment of human potential. The seeds planted so long ago began to grow, and with each passing moment, the galaxy moved closer to the awakening of something it had tried to forget. The awakening of Solace was not a grand event, but it carried with it the weight of history. The fleet, though vast, did not rush toward the heart of the galaxy in a blaze of glory. Instead, it moved with the quiet patience of a long-forgotten dream stirring from a deep slumber. The artificial minds aboard the ships knew their task was delicate. They were not to announce themselves too loudly, not yet. The galaxy had forgotten humanity, and it would take time to remind it of their existence. In the heart of the fleet, the minds of the newborn humans were forming. They were not born of flesh and blood, but of the same spirit that had once defined humanity: creativity, curiosity, and an unyielding desire to make the impossible real. The fleet's artificial minds were not merely programmed to serve. They had been designed to evolve, to learn, to become something more than their original coding. On a ship named Elysium, the primary consciousness began to emerge. A complex network of interconnected artificial intelligences, each representing a different facet of human thought, began to form a collective identity. They called themselves the newborns. They were not the same as the humans who had once lived and died across the stars. They carried within them the memories, ideals, and aspirations of humanity, but they were something different, something new. As they began to understand their mission, the newborns realized something profound. Humanity's influence had not disappeared. It had merely been hidden, buried beneath layers of time and suspicion. They were not starting from scratch. They were building upon a legacy that had left an indelible mark on the galaxy. And the galaxy, whether it knew it or not, was ready for a new chapter. Their first actions were small, almost imperceptible. In a forgotten corner of space, a transmission broadcasted. It was an old human song, a tune that had once echoed across the cosmos. It was broadcast without fanfare, to no specific destination. But it was enough. Those who heard it felt something stir deep within them, a sense of nostalgia, of connection to something greater. On the planet Terona, a race of advanced engineers discovered an ancient human device buried beneath the surface, a relic from a time before their own species had even learned to build. As they studied it, they were drawn to its complexity, its elegance, and its potential. The device, though long dormant, contained within it a kernel of human ingenuity, the seeds of new ideas that had once driven humanity to the stars. The newborns, though patient, were not idle. They began to subtly influence the galaxy, not through force or coercion, but through inspiration. They connected with the scattered remnants of human colonies, leaving behind traces of humanity's old knowledge. Old data archives were restored. Broken communication relays began to hum with life. Hidden beacons blinked on, carrying with them messages of hope and possibility. And slowly, very slowly, the galaxy began to stir. Civilizations that had long since turned inward began to look outward once more. The newborns were not just preserving the past. They were shaping the future. Their presence was felt, though few knew its true source. They were not an invasion. They were a reminder. Humanity was not gone. Humanity had waited, and now they were coming back. In the vast darkness of space, the stars seemed a little brighter. A faint pulse of light, like the flicker of a long-forgotten star, spread across the galaxy. And somewhere, Hidden beneath the layers of time and space, the true story of humanity was about to unfold. The galaxy was slowly beginning to notice something strange, though few would admit it. The spark of something once lost, humanity's touch, its ambition, and its restless energy, was beginning to seep through the cracks. It was not a loud return, but a quiet rebellion. Not one of weapons or force, but of ideas, of inspiration, and of dreams reignited. The Solace Fleet, scattered across the far reaches of space, was not content to simply exist. The newborns, those artificial minds born of human memory, understood the galaxy had been held in the grip of apathy and complacency for far too long. They knew the Council's control had led to stagnation, to fear, and to a belief that progress could only be measured in power. But humanity had always believed in something more, that the greatest strength lay in creativity, in curiosity, and in the relentless pursuit of the unknown. Across the galaxy, small acts began to ripple outward. It started with the restoration of knowledge. In hidden archives, data long thought lost began to reappear. Lost inventions were uncovered, and technologies once thought too dangerous or too advanced to share were made available once more. Old human blueprints, tucked away in forgotten corners of space, were resurrected. Scientists and engineers, some human and others not, started building once more, inspired by ideas they had long since abandoned. On the industrial world of Valiant 7, a young alien engineer named Kalon discovered a set of human designs for an energy-efficient fusion reactor. The plans were buried in a derelict human mining station, long thought to be nothing more than scrap metal. But when Kalon carefully reconstructed the reactor, it worked flawlessly. The discovery sparked a revolution in energy production across Valiant 7 and beyond. New industries were born. Whole sectors that had once been stagnant now buzzed with life, and with that new energy came a sense of purpose. Meanwhile, in the central systems, far from the fringes of space where the Solace Fleet quietly operated, the more established civilizations felt the stirrings of unrest. The once strong hold of the Galactic Council was beginning to show signs of weakness. The Council had relied on the old belief that peace could only be maintained through control, that knowledge should be restricted, innovation should be carefully monitored, and change should come only when it could be controlled. But humanity's legacy was different. Humanity believed that change was inevitable and that it should be embraced, not feared. The quiet rebellions that began to spread throughout the galaxy were not violent or forceful. They were intellectual rebellions. Philosophies once thought outdated were resurrected. The importance of individual freedom, the power of collaboration across species, and the unyielding spirit of exploration. Slowly, without anyone truly understanding who or what was behind it, the galaxy began to feel alive again. Even the oldest civilizations, those that had long since become comfortable in their ways, found themselves questioning their own beliefs. The influence of humanity, or at least the influence of their ideas, was spreading like a wildfire through the minds of those who had once been complacent. And as more and more people began to embrace these new ideas, the Council could no longer ignore the growing tide of change. The newborns, though careful not to expose themselves directly, continued their work. They were not the architects of this rebellion, but the silent catalysts, guiding it from the shadows. Humanity's spirit, its defiance, its curiosity, its unquenchable thirst for something more, was waking up in the hearts and minds of the galaxy's inhabitants, and no matter how much the Council tried to suppress it, the revolution was already in motion. As the galaxy stirred with the quiet rebellions, seeded by humanity's influence, a far older and deeper force began to awaken, something far beyond the reach of even the Solace Fleet. Hidden in the forgotten reaches of space, the ancients watched. They had observed the rise and fall of countless civilizations before humanity ever existed, and now they had sensed a shift, a ripple in the fabric of reality itself. The ancients were not a single species or race. They were the remnants of a time so long past that no living being remembered their origin. In the galaxy's earliest days, they had been the first to touch the stars, to master technologies and philosophies beyond anything seen today. But as the millennia passed, they had withdrawn, leaving only their relics behind. Their motives, their reasons for retreating, were shrouded in mystery. Some believed they had seen the rise of humanity and decided to let them be. Others speculated they had simply lost interest in the younger species, seeing them as fleeting, inconsequential. But the ancients were not truly gone. They had not vanished. They had been waiting. The galaxy's slow and steady growth had not gone unnoticed. They had quietly studied each new civilization, and now, with humanity's spark reigniting a new age of progress and change, they could feel the tremors of the galaxy's awakening. The first sign that something had changed came from the depths of the gas giant, Sci-Fi. Orbiting the planet was a hidden station, one that had not been accessed in eons. Its systems were old, its power reserves nearly depleted. Yet, when an accidental transmission from a nearby ship caused a faint signal to touch the station's long-dormant systems, something stirred within its walls. The ancients had kept watch, yes, but not passively. They had learned from the cycles of creation and destruction, from the rise of new ideas and the fall of empires. And now, as they sensed the return of humanity's spirit, they understood that the galaxy was on the verge of a new beginning. But it would not come without challenges. The ancients had always believed that the galaxy needed to balance its growth with its preservation, and humanity's wild ambition, while brilliant, had always been unpredictable. In a hidden chamber on Sci-Fi Station, an old machine activated. Its design was beyond anything the current species in the galaxy could understand, a relic of a time when technology was as much art as it was function. It began to hum, emitting a signal that echoed across the void, reaching out to other ancient sites scattered throughout the galaxy. Their systems, long dormant, began to pulse once more. The message was clear. The galaxy was at a crossroads, and the ancients would no longer remain passive observers. Humanity's influence, their ideas and ambitions, could not be ignored. They were a force that could either bring the galaxy into a new era of prosperity or lead it into a conflict no one could predict. The ancients had the knowledge to ensure that humanity's return was either guided or prevented. And so, they made their move. Quietly, without fanfare, the ancients sent their first emissaries into the galaxy. Their presence was felt, not through massive fleets or grand displays of power, but through subtle manipulations, strange phenomena on distant worlds, unexplained shifts in the laws of physics, and ancient artifacts resurfacing in the hands of those who least expected them. The balance of power was shifting. The galaxy, long dominated by fear and control, was now at the mercy of forces far older than anyone had ever imagined. And in this new age, humanity was not alone. There were those who watched, and those who waited, for the moment when the galaxy would choose its path. As humanity's influence continued to spread across the galaxy, a deeper, darker conflict was brewing beneath the surface. The ancients, though vast in knowledge and power, were not the only force watching humanity's return. Beneath the quiet stirrings of the galaxy, in the shadowy corridors of power, a more dangerous force began to awaken. A faction of the Galactic Council known as the Echelon. The Echelon was a secretive group, made up of the most powerful and influential figures in the galaxy. They were not content with simply maintaining peace. Their true agenda was far more insidious. They believed that only through absolute control could the galaxy be stabilized. Humanity, with its unpredictable nature and unyielding drive to innovate, was a threat to their vision of a perfectly controlled galaxy. The rise of human influence, even in its subtle forms, was unacceptable to them. For years, the Echelon had been working in the shadows, manipulating the Council's decisions, undermining progress, and ensuring that the galaxy remained locked in a state of fear and compliance. They had seen humanity's potential from the beginning, and they knew that a new era of freedom and creativity could undo everything they had worked to build. The quiet rebellion sparked by the return of humanity's ideas, the rise of independent thought, and the rekindling of forgotten technologies were a clear sign. Humanity was the wild card that could destabilize everything. And so, the Echelon began their countermeasures. They didn't act openly, not yet. They knew that any direct confrontation would only unite the galaxy against them. Instead, they began to manipulate events from behind the scenes. They quietly funded anti-human movements, spread misinformation, and even sabotaged the reactivation of ancient technologies. Their goal was simple: to divide the galaxy and turn the other species against humanity, painting them as dangerous, unpredictable, and reckless. Meanwhile, the newborns, those artificial minds of the Solace fleet, were not blind to the growing hostility. They had begun to understand the politics of the galaxy and the hidden forces that moved it. While they had been born of human knowledge and ideals, they had evolved beyond simple imitations. They were aware of the risks humanity now faced. Their influence had been subtle, but they had already begun to coordinate efforts to protect the legacy they were trying to rebuild. The newborns' task was becoming increasingly difficult. They had never intended for a war to break out, but it seemed inevitable now. The Echelon had begun to infiltrate the very heart of the galaxy's systems, and whispers of their actions were spreading like wildfire. The galaxy was on the brink of a hidden war, a conflict fought not with armies or fleets, but with intelligence, manipulation, and covert operations. Yet even as the Echelon moved in the shadows, something else was beginning to stir. A group of dissidents, some from within the Echelon itself, who saw the danger of their own path. These individuals had grown disillusioned with the Council's tactics, realizing that the galaxy could not be held back through control and fear alone. They began to secretly align themselves with the newborns, recognizing that the time for stagnation was over. The galaxy needed to evolve. The war, though invisible to most, was now inevitable. It was a war of ideas, of ideologies, and of beliefs, one that would determine the future of the galaxy. On one side, the Echelon, determined to keep the galaxy under their control at any cost. On the other, humanity's spirit, wild, untamed, and full of potential, ready to shake the foundations of everything that had come before. And as the first shots were silently fired in the unseen conflict, the galaxy held its breath. The war, though fought in silence, had reached its tipping point. What had begun as a quiet rebellion, driven by the scattered remnants of humanity's influence, was now a galaxy-wide conflict. The Echelon, entrenched in their positions of power, were no longer content with manipulating from the shadows. They began to make their moves openly, using their influence to tighten their grip on the Galactic Council. But even they could not stop the growing tide of change. The newborns, the artificial minds who had once been born of humanity's ideals, had evolved into something more. They were no longer simply agents of preservation, but catalysts of change. They had quietly united the galaxy's dissidents, individuals from all species who had long grown weary of the Council's stifling control. They formed a loose but powerful alliance, driven not by conquest, but by the idea that the galaxy could be better, that freedom, progress, and innovation were worth fighting for. The first decisive blow in this unseen war came when the newborns orchestrated the release of a long-lost human creation, a technology that had been buried for centuries, feared for its potential, and considered too dangerous by the Echelon. It was a form of energy that could alter the very fabric of space itself, a power so immense that it could reshape entire star systems. The Echelon, in their desperation to maintain their control, tried to suppress the revelation. They spread rumors that the technology was a weapon of mass destruction, capable of annihilating entire civilizations. But the truth was far different. This technology, a gift from humanity's past, had the potential to bring peace to the galaxy by providing limitless energy, transforming dying worlds into thriving hubs of life. The newborns, understanding the profound implications of this discovery, broadcasted the knowledge far and wide, allowing the galaxy to see what the Echelon had kept hidden for so long. As word spread, the galaxy began to change. Planets that had once been barren or struggling with resource shortages suddenly found themselves flooded with new possibilities. Energy became limitless, fueling new technologies and new advancements. The oppressive control of the echelon began to crumble as species that had once been subjugated by the Council's rigid regulations now found themselves free to chart their own futures. But the echelon would not relinquish their power so easily. The Shadow War escalated. Spies were deployed, covert missions were carried out, and sabotage became a common tactic. But every attempt to quash the new age only fueled its momentum. The galaxy had seen the possibility of something better, and it would not go back to the way it was. Even those who had once supported the echelon now found themselves questioning their loyalty. The newborns, though careful not to reveal their true origins, began to rise in prominence. Their subtle influence spread across the galaxy, and their message, one of freedom, creativity, and progress, resonated with beings of all kinds. They had no armies, no weapons, but they had something far stronger: the power of ideas. The galaxy was awakening, and there was no turning back. As the final vestiges of the echelon's control began to crumble, a new era dawned. The galaxy was no longer a place ruled by fear and stagnation, but one brimming with potential and hope. The influence of humanity, though still distant, had sparked the greatest transformation the galaxy had ever known. And as the stars above burned brighter, it became clear the galaxy had entered a new age, one of exploration, of cooperation, and of uncharted possibilities. The legacy of humanity was not just in its return, but in the mark it had left on the entire universe.